Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving right into Dr. John Oswald's fascinating lecture to uncover what I like to call the hidden architectural blueprint of an ancient text. We're looking closely at the incredibly rich themes tucked away in chapters 56 and 57 of the book of Isaiah. And let me tell you, we'll be unpacking some concepts that are really going to challenge the way we view inclusion, religion, and the whole idea of grace.
Here's our structural roadmap for today. We're going to uncover a hidden literary structure, explore the welcoming of forgotten outsiders, redefine the house of prayer, contrast paganism with true covenant, examine the power of humility, and finally, look at God's intended last word.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the hidden literary structure. So, to understand why the final chapters of Isaiah feel so structurally unique and, honestly, maybe a bit anticlimactic at first glance, we've got to look at some brilliant textual detective work by Dr. Oswalt. He reveals that chapters 56 through 66 are actually built as a chiasm. Now, if you're not familiar, a chiasm is this deliberate X-shaped literary design meant to point our attention to a very specific climax. It's an absolutely incredible ancient writing technique, where the themes ascend to a peak and then descend in the exact reverse order.
This really brilliantly illustrates that hidden blueprint. Notice how the text literally mirrors itself. It ascends from the inclusion of righteous foreigners at level A, up through the inability to be righteous, to the divine warrior, to light dawning, all the way up to the massive revelation of the anointed Messiah right there in chapter 61 at level E. And then, it steps right back down through those exact same themes. It's like a giant puzzle. This device keeps the climactic point, the Messiah, front and center, while deeply grounding us in the broader foundational goal of righteous living.
Moving right along to Section 2, welcoming the forgotten outsiders.
Now, shifting to the outer foundational layers of this chiasm, we uncover a massive theme of radical inclusion. In chapter 56, we're confronted with a fascinating shift from earlier ancient texts, like Deuteronomy. Previously marginalized groups like foreigners and eunuchs who were strictly forbidden from worship are suddenly explicitly welcome to keep the covenant, which naturally raises a huge rhetorical question. Why did God exclude them initially, only to draw them in now?
Well, Oswald explains it kind of like this. Early on, basic education required these stark, physical rules to teach the concept of excellence and wholeness. It's like learning the absolute basics before you can do calculus, right? But the ultimate goal was always spiritual wholeness. So the focus shifts from physical attributes to welcoming absolutely anyone who replicates God's righteous behavior, specifically those who keep the Sabbath, maintain justice, and actively choose what pleases the divine.
That brings us to Section 3, a house of prayer. This radical message of inclusion completely renames and redefines the physical space and the very purpose of worship in the ancient world. Look at this historical layout of Herod's temple. It vividly shows the reality of the day, featuring heavily segregated courts. You've got the inner court of the priests, the court of the men, the court of the women, and then way on the far outside, the court of the Gentiles. I mean, there were literally warning stones along that outer boundary threatening outsiders with death if they dared to cross the line. Intense, right?
So, the crucial takeaway here is the stark contrast Isaiah presents to all that intense segregation. You see, the temple was never meant to be this exclusive place of mechanical sacrifice for a select few. Instead, God boldly declares it to be a house of prayer for all nations. It's supposed to be a unified place of relationship and communication, designed for the entire world to come and experience the glory of the Lord. It's a total game changer.
Next up, Section 4, paganism versus true covenant. With that inclusive foundation laid out, we've got to address a core behavioral conflict facing the people, treating salvation like it's a birthright rather than a transformative, living relationship. We actually need to challenge a pretty common assumption here. Dr. Oswalt defines paganism not simply as bowing down to statues of other gods, but as an attitude. It's performing mechanical religious actions purely to manipulate God into supplying your personal needs. It's essentially running on a spiritual treadmill, doing the right rituals just to extract a blessing.
There's a totally fascinating contrast in motivations going on here. The fear of condemnation means doing the bare minimum religious activity simply to avoid punishment, or, hell. But true covenant living, which is characterized by the fear of the Lord, is doing the absolute maximum to please God, driven purely by a relationship of love. It's a completely different mindset.
And this forces us to ask a rather uncomfortable question. What does paganism look like in modern times? Are we tithing just to get rich? Are we reading texts and fasting just to land a new job? Because if we're treating our relationship with God like a mechanical transaction, where we're secretly asking, how little can I give and still get by? Well, we are fundamentally practicing paganism.
On the flip side, the logical flow of a true covenant is beautifully simple, and it completely breaks that pagan cycle. Step 1. We realize we are saved entirely by grace. Step 2. Because of that immense grace, we intentionally stop the old sinful life. We definitely don't use grace as a free pass to keep on sinning. And step 3, we put on the new clothes of justice, equity, and righteousness simply out of love and immense gratitude.
Let's move to Section 5, the power of humility.
So how do we actually step out of that mechanical pagan religion and enter into this true spiritual covenant? Well, Dr. Oswalt points out this absolutely beautiful paradox found in chapter 57. The unimaginable God, who inhabits eternity and unapproachable light, chooses to make his home not with the proud, self-sufficient folks, but with the contrite and lowly spirit.
Think about it. Exalting yourself and relying entirely on your own righteousness, that only leads to a hard fall. But when you actively tear down those massive obstructions of your own pride and you honestly admit your deep neediness and complete dependence on God, something amazing happens. God steps in to revive your spirit, and he actually lifts you up. As noted in the lecture, Christianity is entirely unique in this regard. God comes to us first, precisely at the very moment we admit we cannot save ourselves.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, God's intended last word.
Finally, we arrive at a truly vital paradigm shift. Dr. Oswalt emphatically notes that even when the ancient text speaks of God's anger or calamity striking the people, the ultimate purpose is never simply destruction. Never. The entire purpose of allowing that hardship is to bring people to their senses so they can be healed. His intended last word is always, always healing and restoration.
And this profound healing fundamentally restores our relationship with the divine. When we realize we've been handed grace instead of the destruction we actually deserved, it naturally generates what the text beautifully calls the fruit of the lips. What does that mean? It means outward, spoken praise and gratitude, entirely replacing all of our inward pride.
Now, Oswald is careful to clarify a key point here. This incredible grace does not equal universalism. That's the belief that all people will eventually be saved regardless of their choices. Instead, he points to the tragic reality of the wicked. And wickedness here is defined simply as persisting in godlessness, basically living your life as if there is no God. If a person persists in that arrogant self-sufficiency, they ultimately reject the healing offered to them, leaving them like a tossing sea with absolutely no shalom, no peace.
So, we leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on today. Will you admit your need for healing, or will your own self-sufficiency keep you tossing in the sea outside the house of prayer? What barriers of mechanical religion and pride do you personally need to tear down today to truly enter into this magnificent, inclusive architecture of grace? Thanks for joining us for this explainer. We'll see you next time.